wind carried a strange whisper through the empty trees as Daniel stepped out of his car at the edge of the forgotten village. It sounded almost like someone calling his name from deep within the forest. For a moment he thought it was only the wind, but the voice came again, softer and closer. Daniel stood still for a moment, staring toward the dark forest that surrounded the village like a silent wall. The place looked strangely untouched by time, with crooked wooden houses leaning along a cracked dirt road. A cold uneasiness settled in his chest as if the village itself was quietly watching him. He reminded himself that he had come here for a story, not to chase ghosts. As a journalist, Daniel had spent years investigating strange rumors and unsolved mysteries across the country, but none of those stories had begun with a voice calling him from the dark. The rumor that brought him here was about an old ruined church hidden deep inside the forest. According to several reports, people who entered the church heard whispers coming from beneath its altar. Some claimed the whispers knew secrets about them that no one else could know. Daniel walked slowly down the dirt road, noticing that most of the houses had their windows tightly covered. A few curtains moved slightly as he passed, suggesting someone was watching from inside. Yet no one stepped outside to greet him. Near the center of the village, he found a tiny shop with a flickering yellow light above the door. An elderly man sat on a wooden chair outside, quietly smoking a pipe. The man's tired eyes followed Daniel the moment he approached. Daniel politely asked if the man could tell him where the old church was. The old man froze as soon as he heard the question. His pipe slipped from his fingers and dropped onto the dusty ground. For several seconds the man said nothing at all. His pale eyes slowly lifted toward the forest at the edge of the village. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled like someone remembering a terrible nightmare. He warned Daniel that the church was cursed and should never be entered again. Long ago, the villagers had tried to seal the altar beneath the church after strange deaths began to occur. But according to him, the whispers never stopped. Daniel tried asking what exactly happened inside the church. The old man only shook his head and whispered that some secrets were meant to remain buried. Then he quickly stood and disappeared inside the shop. The door slammed shut behind him with a hollow echo. A moment later, the light above the shop flickered and turned off completely. The village returned to its unsettling silence. At the far end of the road, Daniel noticed a narrow trail leading into the dark forest. A broken wooden sign leaned beside the path, its faded letters barely readable through years of decay. The only word he could clearly see was church. The forest swallowed the daylight as he stepped onto the trail. Every branch cracked loudly beneath his boots, echoing unnaturally through the woods. It felt like the forest was announcing his arrival to something waiting ahead. After nearly 20 minutes of walking, Daniel finally saw the ruined church through the trees. Its tall stone tower leaned slightly to one side, and its broken windows stared like hollow eyes. The building looked ancient and forgotten, yet strangely untouched by time. The large wooden doors were half open, as if someone had entered recently. Daniel pushed them slowly, and the hinges screamed in protest. The sound echoed through the empty hall like a warning. Inside the church, darkness clung to the walls, and the smell of damp stone filled the air. Daniel's flashlight revealed a long aisle leading directly to the altar, at the far end of the room. Just as he stepped forward, a faint whisper rose from somewhere beneath the floor, gently speaking his name. The interior was far larger than it had appeared from outside. Long wooden pews stood crooked and rotting, covered in thick layers of gray dust. Torn pieces of cloth hung from the broken windows, swaying gently as cold wind slipped through the cracks. Daniel raised his flashlight and slowly walked down the narrow aisle. The beam of light moved across faded paintings of saints that had peeled away from the walls. Their hollow eyes seemed to follow him with quiet judgment. The altar stood at the far end of the church, beneath a cracked stone arch. Unlike the rest of the building, it appeared strangely untouched by decay. The stone surface looked dark and smooth, almost as if it had been recently cleaned. As Daniel approached it, the whisper grew clearer. It no longer sounded like random noise carried by the wind. The voice moved slowly around him, circling in the air like something unseen was studying him. A sudden chill crept up Daniel's spine. He glanced behind him, half expecting to see someone standing among the empty pews. But the church remained silent and empty. His flashlight revealed strange carvings along the base of the altar. The symbols looked ancient and twisted, nothing like the religious markings usually found in churches. They formed circles and jagged shapes that made his eyes ache when he stared too long. Daniel knelt down to examine them more closely. The dust around the altar had been disturbed recently, as if someone had been digging there. That discovery sent a sharp pulse of unease through his chest. Near the back of the altar, part of the wooden floor looked loose and uneven. Daniel pressed his foot against it carefully. The board shifted with a hollow sound that echoed beneath the church. He crouched down and pulled the board aside, revealing a narrow stone staircase hidden beneath the floor. A wave of cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. It carried a foul scent of damp earth and something far older. The whisper suddenly grew louder, no longer distant, but rising directly from the hidden chamber. This time Daniel clearly heard words forming in the darkness below. The voice slowly repeated his name, as if welcoming him. The whisper followed Daniel as he stepped down the narrow stone staircase beneath the altar. Each step echoed softly against the damp walls, as though something deep below was listening to his approach. The voice grew clearer with every step, breathing his name in a slow, patient rhythm. The staircase ended in a small underground chamber, carved from ancient stone. Daniel's flashlight flickered as it swept across the room, revealing walls covered with dark symbols scratched deep into the surface. The markings twisted into shapes that made his stomach tighten with unease. The air felt heavy and damp, filled with a strange metallic scent. In the center of the chamber stood a large stone altar, darker than the one above it. Its surface looked stained, as if something had been spilled there many times before. Daniel stepped closer, unable to shake the feeling that someone else was in the room with him. His flashlight beam trembled slightly in his hand as he turned in a slow circle. Every corner of the chamber remained empty, yet the whisper continued to move around him. The voice was no longer random or distant. It spoke slowly and clearly now, like someone standing just behind his shoulder. Each word crawled through the cold air with unnatural calm. It began telling him things no stranger should know. It spoke about his childhood, about the night his father disappeared without explanation. The whisper even repeated the secret Daniel had never told anyone about the guilt he carried. Daniel's breath became shallow as he backed away from the altar. His heart pounded loudly enough to echo through the chamber. Somehow the voice knew the darkest memories buried deep inside his mind. The flashlight suddenly flickered again, plunging the room into brief darkness. For a split second, Daniel thought he saw a tall shadow move across the far wall. When the light returned, nothing was there. The whisper let out a soft sound that almost resembled laughter. It moved around the chamber like a living presence, circling him slowly. Every step Daniel took seemed to draw the unseen thing closer. He turned his light toward the altar again and noticed something carved into the front of the stone. A deep crack ran across the surface, forming the shape of a jagged mouth. The whisper seemed to rise directly from that dark opening. As he leaned closer to inspect it, the voice suddenly grew stronger. The whisper was no longer soft or distant. It sounded eager, almost hungry. Then the voice spoke a sentence that froze Daniel where he stood. It gently thanked him for coming back. The words echoed through the chamber, as if they had been waiting years to be spoken again. Daniel stumbled backward from the altar, his heartbeat thundering through the underground chamber. The whisper lingered in the damp air, no longer faint but alive with unsettling patience. It sounded pleased, as though it had been waiting a very long time for someone to listen. His flashlight beam trembled across the stone floor until it landed on something half buried in the dust near the wall. It was a small weathered journal wrapped in cracked leather. The pages looked ancient, their edges yellowed and brittle with age. Daniel knelt down slowly and picked it up, brushing away years of dust. The leather cover was marked with a faded cross that had been scratched violently across the surface. Something about it suggested desperation rather than faith. He opened the journal carefully, afraid the fragile pages might crumble in his hands. The handwriting inside was uneven and hurried, as if the writer had been racing against time. The first few pages mention the church and the strange sounds coming from beneath the altar.